Hello and welcome back to Fantasy Football by Ben. Today I'm going to be talking about the draft, first round last night, and how I think they're going to be doing this fantasy football season. So the first pick last night, pretty much everybody expected it to be Trevor Lawrence, and it was. And I think Trevor Lawrence is a pretty solid fantasy quarterback. He runs the ball quite a bit, and I think just overall in that offense, he's going to make it a lot better than what Gardner Minshew had last year, and he could finish as a top 15 quarterback in fantasy, I believe. But if he stays healthy, that's always a positive. And I think that going forward, Trevor Lawrence could be a really good quarterback in fantasy this season. I have him in the top 20, but I think he could get to the 15, to that range of like the Matt Ryans, Matt Stafford in like the 11, 10 area potentially this year in fantasy. At number 2, we kind of expected the Jets to draft a quarterback, but we just didn't know who. And they ended up picking Zach Wilson. I think Zach Wilson's a really good quarterback. He was really good at BYU. And I think going forward, he's going to be a really good quarterback. And the Jets added some offensive pieces to help him. I mean, Jamison Crowder's still there. He's a really good wide receiver. He's getting old, though. But Corey Davis, I mean, they got Denzel Mims, who's young. And, I mean, that's a pretty good receiving core. And I think if Jamison Crowder can teach some things to Denzel Mims, or Corey Davis teach some things to Denzel Mims, I think that could be a really good receiving core, and they're really a good overall offense potentially. They just don't really have a great running back that I know of yet, and they might draft one in the second round today. But as of right now, that offense is still growing, and I think Zach Wilson was probably a pretty good quarterback to pick for them, and I think that he's going to be a really solid fantasy quarterback this season. I don't know if he's going to be great, but I think he'll be solid. With the third pick, the 49ers traded up for this pick, and so you kind of expected them to draft a quarterback, and they said that they would, so that they would have competition with Jimmy Garoppolo, and they drafted Trey Lance. I think Trey Lance is a really good quarterback. He's kind of underrated. Went to the same college as Carson Wentz, and I think that he's going to be a really solid quarterback in fantasy this year if he gets the starting job. But, I mean, I don't know if he's going to get the starting job because Jimmy Garoppolo is not a bad quarterback, but I do think that Trey Lance could get the job, and he fits Shanahan's offense very well. And so I do think this could be a really good season for Trey Lance if he plays. And he's got some great weapons. I mean, George Kittle. They have Deebo Samuel and the rookie Brandon Ayuk from last year. And so I do think that there's some good pieces in that offense. And I think Trey Lance could have a good season if he gets the starting job. And if he doesn't get it right away, I think he could. If he gets the job later in the season, I think he could be a really good fantasy piece to some teams as like a backup quarterback to start off the year, and then when he gets the starting job, then he's going to be a good starting quarterback for fantasy teams. The fourth pick was Kyle Pitts for the Atlanta Falcons, and Kyle Pitts is a really good tight end, but I think he's going to end up playing like wide receiver, and I don't know how many targets he's going to get in that offense because Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley are still there as of right now, and also Hayden Hurst is still there, and so I do think that it hurts his fantasy value a little bit, but if he can do like what Jonnu Smith did last year, I think that he could be a really good fantasy tight end, where A.J. Brown got a lot of targets and so did Corey Davis, but Jonnu Smith scored touchdowns and caught passes, and I mean, he did a really good job in fantasy last year. Jonnu Smith was a tight end one for like 6 weeks straight, and I think that Kyle Pitts could do something like that, but I don't know if he's going to do it this season, this year, right now. But I do think he's a really good tight end, and he will be really good for fantasy football. The Bengals had the fifth pick, and they went with Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase, he didn't play his senior or his junior year of college, and he was a really solid wide receiver his sophomore year, really productive with Joe Burrow, and now they're reuniting him with Joe Burrow. And I think this is a really good thing for him because T. Higgins they drafted last year in the second round, and they got rid of A.J. Green, or A.J. Green didn't re-sign with them or whatever. And so I do think that this could be number one wide receiver for that team. But also T. Higgins is still there, and he was a really good wide receiver last year, and Tyler Boyd's still there. But I do think that Jamar Chase could have a really good fantasy season, and especially if Joe Burrow's playing. I don't know if he's going to start right away or not, but once Joe Burrow starts playing, I think that's going to be a really, really good fantasy season for Jamar Chase this year. The Dolphins had the sixth pick, and you had to guess another offensive player was going, and it was Jaylen Waddle. Jaylen Waddle is interesting to me because he broke his ankle on a kickoff last year and during this college football season, and then he came back for the final game. And Jaylen Waddle was really productive the year before, and now he's reuniting with Tua again, and I do think that Jaylen Waddle will have a really good season, and he's really shifty. Kind of reminds me of Tyreek Hill, or at least in the comparisons yesterday, he reminded me of Tyreek Hill. And so I do think that he could be really good for that offense, and they don't really have a dominant number one wide receiver in that offense. I would say that it's probably Devontae Parker, but I don't know if he can sustain like a wide receiver one numbers for a whole season, and he's super inconsistent at being healthy or not. And so I do think that if Jaylen Waddle is healthy and playing, I think that he could be the number one wide receiver in that offense this next season. But I don't know what that offense is going to be like, because last year it was with Ryan Fitzpatrick, and their offense was really good when Ryan Fitzpatrick was playing. And when Tua started playing, he was throwing for like 210 yards a game instead of Fitzpatrick's like 300 yards per game kind of thing. So I wonder what that offense is going to be like this year in fantasy. And now we move to the 10th pick. With the 10th pick, the Philadelphia Eagles traded for that pick, and they got DeVonta Smith. DeVonta Smith could potentially be the number one wide receiver in that offense, and he's going to be pretty good with Jalen Hurts, and Jalen Hurts' value automatically goes up a little bit more with DeVonta Smith in that offense. Last year, the number one wide receiver when he was like fully playing was Jalen Reagor, and I mean, I guess you count Dallas Goedert as their number one wide receiver, but he's a tight end. And so I do think that DeVonta Smith will come in and pretty much be the number one wide receiver in that offense. And so I do think that this could be a really, really productive fantasy season for DeVonta Smith. And the Eagles have been known to run the ball a lot. And so I do think that this could be a really good season for Jalen Hurts as well, even with DeVonta Smith, or even with DeVonta Smith and Jalen Reagor like being young guys, not really playing in the NFL, not a whole lot of experience. I think that this could be a really good fantasy season for DeVonta Smith and Hurts. And then we get to number 11, and that is Justin Fields. The Bears traded for the 11th pick from the Giants and drafted Justin Fields. This was a phenomenal pick for the Bears, and I do think that Justin Fields could be a really good fantasy quarterback next season, and he's got Allen Robinson right away. And this is going to be a really, really good season for Allen Robinson, and I think Justin Fields is going to have a really good season as well. And I really like the pick, and I think Justin Fields is going to be a really good fantasy quarterback for the next couple of years and probably further on. But I do not think that I don't know what they're going to do with Dalton and Foles, and so I'm kind of interested to see if they're going to have Fields not start right away. But if he's the best quarterback in that group, then I think they're going to have to start him. So I do think this was a really good pick for the Bears, and he could be a franchise quarterback going forward, and he's a great player. The number 15 pick was a New England Patriots pick, and I really like Mac Jones going to the Patriots because I think he is like the most accurate quarterback in this draft is what I heard yesterday, but I do think that he's a little bit more mobile than people think, and he's also a really good quarterback, really smart guy, and definitely like a Bill Belichick kind of guy. And I do think that he will win that starting job over Cam Newton. And I expect Mac Jones to be a really good fantasy quarterback. And that's going to help some fantasy players this season in fantasy on that Patriots team because, like, Jonnu Smith is now there, Hunter Henry. And I think that that's really going to help them if there's a quarterback that's accurate and he throws the ball a lot. And I think the Patriots could be throwing the ball a lot this year. And so I do think that's going to help the production of Mac Jones. And I think he'll be a really solid fantasy quarterback this next season. At number 20, the New York Giants, when they traded with the Bears, they got the 20th pick, and they drafted another wide receiver. His name is Kadarius Toney, and I'm not a huge fan of this pick because I do think that since they got Kenny Galladay and they have Slayton and they have Golden Tate and they have Sterling Shepard, I do think that this was kind of a pick, but I mean, he could be really good in fantasy. He could have a couple really good weeks. And Daniel Jones is going to have a lot of options to throw to. And so I do think that this could be a really good season for Daniel Jones. But I'm not sure if Tooney's going to have a really good season or not. Because he was kind of picked early, though, to be like a player that they wouldn't trust, but they already have 3 really good wide receivers, and I do think that that pick was not a very good one for the New York Giants. The 24th pick in the draft went to the Steelers, and I kind of figured that they were going to draft a running back. I just didn't know which one, and they drafted Najee Harris. I really like Najee Harris. I think he's going to be a really good fantasy running back next season, and the Pittsburgh Steelers really needed running back, and then when they drafted him, I think they kind of expected to draft a workhorse, and his stature is very similar to Derrick Henry's. He's a little bit smaller and a little bit shorter, but smaller size-wise, a little bit shorter in height. And so I do think that he's going to be a really good fantasy running back. He could score a lot of touchdowns. And last year, with James Conner getting in and out of the lineup because he was hurt all the time, I do think that if Najee Harris stays healthy, he could be a really, really good fantasy running back this next season. Maybe even top 15 fantasy running back next season. And then right after Najee Harris goes at 24, number 25 is Travis Etienne. And Travis Etienne, I think, is going to be a really good fantasy running back, but it really hurts James Robinson's value that he was drafted at 25 to the Jaguars. But it's a running back that's more elusive than James Robinson and a little bit quicker. And so I do think that Etienne's going to have a really good fantasy season. And I do think that he's a good receiving back, and that's kind of what they're probably going to use him for early on, is probably receiving downs and stuff. But I think it's really going to hurt James Robinson's fantasy value as a top 15 running back this season in fantasy. And then at number 27, the Baltimore Ravens went with a wide receiver, and this was the last offensive player drafted that I'm going to be talking about, and Rashod Bateman from Minnesota. I do think that Bateman is a very solid fantasy football player, or wide receiver in general, and I think he's going to be a really solid fantasy football player, but I don't know if the Ravens really needed him, but his comparisons were Michael Thomas, and he's got some other really good comparisons, and he's got a really good radius for catching passes, so I do think this could be a really good fantasy season for him. And Hollywood Brown really hasn't taken the number one role in that offense, fantasy-wise, like receiving, and so I do think that it's up for the grabs as a wide receiver. Mark Andrews is definitely Lamar Jackson's favorite target, and so I do think that this could be a really good season for Bateman, and I have him probably inside the top 40 wide receivers, the top 50, maybe, but I think that he could start off really hot and have a really good season, and he's going to catch a lot of passes, I think. Thank you for watching my first round draft recap. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe for new. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.